It's two B's and triple digits as Game Boy Works hits episode 100. It's nice that we can mark the occasion of hitting a big round number for Game Boy Works and finally flipping the hundreds digit in the series odometer with a pretty decent game. Poppin' Twinbee may not be a work of absolute genius, but it's a pretty fair conversion of a long-running Konami series. And Konami means quality. The Twinbee franchise could be seen as a sort of companion piece to the Gradius games, which we've already seen on Game Boy Works with NEMESIS, and Super NES Works and NES Works. Both of these franchises debuted in arcades in 1985, and both revolve heavily around their respective power-up systems. Twinbee never seemed to gain as much traction as Gradius though, probably because it's less unique. It probably also doesn't help that it falls into the cute-em-up genre, which has never really flown in the US. Indeed, this game appeared in both Japan and Europe, but not in America. Until 2007's Konami Arcade Classics for Nintendo DS, the only Twinbee title ever to reach American home consoles was Stinger for NES, which we'll explore next year in NES Works 1987. This Game Boy iteration of the series debuted in Japan in October 1990, but it didn't make its way to Europe until 1994, where Konami localized it as a tie-in to the Super NES release of Poppin' Twinbee, a game that originally debuted in arcades in 1993. So that was stretching the truth just a bit. In Japan, Poppin' Twinbee for Game Boy appeared under the name Twinbee Da, and lacked the fancy mechanical additions that appeared in Poppin' Twinbee. Instead, this is a fairly basic follow-up to the original 1985 Twinbee. In fact, the Japanese manual specifically places it between Twinbee and Stinger. Not that anyone in the world cares all that much about Twinbee canon. Poppin' Twinbee has a straightforward design that spans 4 fairly brief stages. Assuming you can live long enough, the game takes less than half an hour to complete. Like Super Mario Land, that's pretty much the right length for a handheld experience of this type, though unlike Super Mario Land, Poppin' Twinbee falls on the weirdly difficult side of the balance, rather than on the extremely easy side. Where Poppin' Twinbee differs from its Konami stablemate Gradius is in its format. Rather than playing as a horizontal scroller, it instead scrolls upward as a vertical shooter. Twinbee takes a lot of cues from Namco's XEVIOUS. Not only does it scroll upward, your ship, Twinbee for player 1 and his lady pal Winbee for player 2, attacks on 2 planes. The standard gun fires the length of the screen and destroys aerial threats, while your ship's arms can also lob bombs that take out the targets on the ground. It's possible to lose Twinbee's arms to enemy fire, and losing both arms leaves you incapable of retaliating against terrestrial attackers. The dual-plane combat takes a little getting used to here due to the limitations of the Game Boy screen. In order to minimize visual confusion and clutter on a device capable of rendering the world in only 4 shades of gray, Poppin' Twinbee's designers denoted altitude with the use of color contrast. Aerial objects appear in darker tones than ground-based objects, which are rendered in Game Boy's lighter shades of gray. It's a smart and clever design choice, allowing the backgrounds to contain something other than vast expanses of nothing, while immediately communicating what is a live element and what is merely background, with one exception. The ground emplacements in each stage, whose appearance varies from level to level, are also rendered with the same pale gray as other background details. It can take a little while to get used to the fact that objects fading gently into the scenery can in fact blow you out of the sky. Aside from this one quirk, the other issue that detracts from this game is the same crime everyone commits on Game Boy. The sprites are just a little too big for the system's limited resolution. Compared to arcade and console Twinbees, Poppin' Twinbee doesn't give you a lot of breathing room when the action flies fast and furious. To compensate, Poppin' Twinbee moves a little bit more slowly than in the series' other incarnations. Still, it's impossible not to feel like it all gets a bit unfair at times, especially in boss encounters. The final boss in particular is infuriating. It crowds your ship while firing off a triple spread of large projectiles that have surprisingly unforgiving hitboxes. Poppin' Twinbee tends to give the player a bit of clemency when it comes to collisions, but some of the bosses feel a lot more strict, and it's hard to shake the impression that Konami padded out the brevity of the game by making it extremely challenging. Poppin' Twinbee has one other maddening factor working against it. It suffers from the Gradius effect. That is, when you die, you're likely to lose your power-ups. Going from a speedy, multi-shot death machine trailed by phantom helpers down to a pokey, weak, default Twinbee is basically the point at which you should give up and call it a day. As in Life Force for NES, Poppin' Twinbee does offer one little hint of mercy on this front. When you die, your ship's ghost drifts up toward the top of the screen. If you manage to grab it before it vanishes, you'll recover your powers. This can be difficult to achieve since Twinbee can be slow to respawn. agonizingly slow as you're watching all your hard-earned power-ups drift away off the top of the screen. It especially sucks if you die near the top of the screen, which gives your phantom self a head start on floating out of reach. Still, a fighting chance beats none at all. So with these concerns in mind, Poppin' Twinbee isn't quite the slam dunk you might want it to be, but it's still an excellent shooter for the platform. It looks great, with charming graphics that convey Twinbee's general weirdness and monochrome. I mean, some levels have you fighting flying butcher knives, so it's all a little unhinged. Poppin' Twinbee maintains the series' traditional power-up scheme, which requires you to shoot clouds to cause colored bells to fly out. You can juggle the bells by shooting them, and every few shots a bell will change color. Or rather, color. The monochrome limits of the Game Boy definitely work against a series so defined by its love of pastels. And that could be disastrous for the color-based power-up system, but Poppin' Twinbee manages. Bells appear as medium gray by default, then turn light gray, then white, then transparent. This requires you to pay a little extra attention to the state of a given bell, but considering how disastrous this could have been, Poppin' Twinbee's bell management works pretty well here. Anyway, there is a point to shooting bells. By default, bells simply provide you with points, but when they change color, they grant power-ups. You can increase your speed, double your fire, and collect phantoms that work a bit like Gradius options. The bell system requires careful aim and the ability to shift your attention between hazards and bonuses. So it demands a different skill set than Gradius' power-up cycle or the shoot 'em and grab 'em power-ups of something like Star Soldier. You can also pick up occasional power-ups by bombing ground installations, though most of the time you'll just find point bonuses there. Poppin' Twinbee spans multiple stages, each with a distinct visual theme. You'll fight unique enemies in each level, and these aren't just cosmetic tweaks. Different looking enemies behave distinctly too. The bosses are reasonably interesting, though they tend to demonstrate the same dichotomy you find in Gradius bosses. If you're powered up, you'll tear through them like tissue paper. If you're stumping it with a default Twinbee though, it can be almost impossible. This really becomes evident once you complete the 4th and final scrolling stage and have to take on the 5th stage, which consists of nothing but bosses. But hey, what's a shooter without a little cruelty, right? Like the best cute-em-ups, Poppin' Twinbee looks adorable and it hits hard. It definitely takes practice to master, or else an infinite life's cheat. Despite never making its way to the US, Poppin' Twinbee appears to have done well for Konami. They republished the game in an enhanced color version for Game Boy Color on the Japan and Europe exclusive Game Boy GB Collection 2, and developer M2 gave the game a full-on arcade-style upgrade on the Twinbee Collection for PSP. It's strange and annoying that America missed out on this perfectly charming little Game Boy shooter. Poppin' Twinbee is a pleasant and challenging diversion, packed with cute graphics and great music. And it has one of the most amusing and self-indulgent endings I've ever seen, with caricatures of the dev team flying by one. The Japanese release of the game makes for a pretty cheap pickup these days, and it requires basically no reading comprehension. So you could do a lot worse than adding Poppin' Twinbee, or rather Twinbee Da, to your collection. Next on Game Boy Works, we get started on our second 100 episodes the only possible way that would be appropriate, with a puzzle game.